this is a weird one, folks. It's anyone's guess whether it really happened, but as far as I'm concerned, this is a true story. The implications are simply bizarre, especially in this day and age where miracles or any other form of theological claims are few and far between, and when they do show up, they're immediately debunked with mountains of logic. That'll probably happen to this story too, but it doesn't really matter. I'm not in it for fame. I just want to warn you about the bathroom at one of I-90 East's rest stops. Which one? I seriously don't remember. They all seem the same, don't they? I'm sure you agree on that part. Anyway, it was close to Boston, about a half-hour away. Once upon a time, I was coming home from a road trip to Tennessee. My girlfriend was attending college down there, and I rarely had a chance those days to see her. We spent several days in her dorm doing average couple things like watching movies, playing video games, and having copious amounts of sex. You know how it goes. Having a full-time job with sporadic schedules, I have to be opportunistic about taking these trips, which tend to rise up once a month, since she's usually busy herself. I live in Massachusetts, so these trips take a lot of time, usually requiring breaks at a rest stop or two to go to the bathroom, eat overpriced fast food, or just sleep in my car. Buying gas is obviously a given. Now, I've always enjoyed these places as they bring about an exceptional plethora of individuals. You get the crackheads, the businessmen, tourists, students, you name it. Sometimes you see a large group of people in similar themed clothing, probably coming home from a concert or a themed party. These were fun distractions, and I never really considered myself much of a people watcher until I started making these trips. But yeah, it's fun. My girlfriend and I went to a breakfast joint in the morning, then said goodbye. She went back to her dorm, and I went back to Boston. I had a long drive ahead and wasn't looking forward to it. The drive was uneventful and forgettable. Well, aside from the bathroom incident, which made it quite memorable. So anyway, I'll just jump straight into it. I would be reaching Boston in a half hour, and the momentum gained from the impending conclusion of this long, arduous trip began to excite me. Staring at the road for 8 hours at a time has a general tendency to wear down your soul. I really had to go to the bathroom. I hadn't been paying enough attention for the last 2 hours and missed 2 rest stops in a row. I found myself feeling very uneasy, certain I would fill my pants before making it to one in time. Driving with such an impending call of nature is never fun, and really impacts your performance behind the wheel. Missing an opportunity twice in a row doesn't bode well for your morale. Against all possible odds, I finally saw one on the horizon, those beautiful golden arches of McDonald's mounted on 20-foot-tall poles. I can't recall being happier to see them. I found it ironic since it was their food that I ate 6 hours ago that placed me in this dilemma. But hey, who doesn't appreciate irony, right? The rest stop was the same as all the others, which meant there would be a large bathroom, a choice of fast food restaurants, a convenience store for energy drinks, and a claw game, because why not? I parked my car and made a beeline straight into those doors. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a plaque. More on that later. As I ran into the building, I was immediately overwhelmed by the stench. Instead of an alluring aura of fried food, I smelled trash. Have you ever worked in a food-related location where they just toss out unused food in a particular assigned compactor? Yeah, it smelled like that. There could have been several reasons for this, but I chose not to ponder it and booked it straight into the bathroom. The bathroom stench was brutal. Whatever that smell was, it was certainly coming from in here. I was shallow enough to immediately conclude that the smell was coming from the shirtless fat guy standing by the sink closest to the door, washing himself with the hand soap. Not just his hands, but his entire body. A repulsive sight, for sure, and it was obvious that I wasn't the only one who thought so. People were leading their children away from him and shying away themselves. There was an unused sink next to him, and all the others were currently being used by other people. There was a line waiting for these sinks, and nobody was considering using the sink near the fat guy. Another bathroom patron and I exchanged an uneasy look. In that moment, we were brothers in this ordeal. Two men sharing in the tribulations of a gross, fat, crazy man muttering to himself as he washed with hand soap. Perhaps he was one of those homeless dudes with a mental disorder you hear so much about. He was definitely into religion, that was for sure. I awkwardly passed by him, trying not to breathe in the stench, and avoided making eye contact for fear of seeming judgmental. To say the least, I had to extend a minimal degree of respect for his decision. He was trying to do something about it, even trying to wash his dirty soul with his frantic praying. As I was saying earlier, rest stops are exceptional nexuses for weirdos, and I've seen worse than this. The walls were lined with stalls, at least 10 on each side. I ran to a random one and knocked. When I did, the guy stopped praying and immediately looked at me, his look wild. "Not that one!" he shouted. Great. Now he was talking to me and people were looking at him and then at me. I didn't want this attention. I flung the stall open and slammed it shut. There were far more pressing issues here, and so there I was, sitting on the can. I began to hear the man pray even louder. Someone shouted at him to shut up and get a job. Seems about right. I'd wager he received that advice dozens of times a day. Poor guy. Oh well. The sound was shortly drowned out by those blowers people use to dry their hands. Amidst the droning of the blower units, I heard someone scream. Pooping can be an ordeal for people, you know. The sound was replaced with slamming, like someone was kicking at their door. Weird, but not completely out of the ordinary. I let out a small chuckle and noticed my chuckle had a strange echo to it. Bathrooms tend to have that acoustic quality, but this was different. My chuckle sounded like it was in a church or a cavern. It echoed longer than it should have. Out of curiosity, I cleared my throat and gave that echo a listen. Definitely strange. The man screaming was beginning to sound distant, as if far away. Perhaps he was leaving the bathroom, or maybe he injured himself by accidentally closing the door on his part. You could speculate. The droning from the hand dryers began to change and warp, getting louder with a progressive bass pitch to it, as if it sounded bigger. The room began to shake, not like an earthquake, but just a strong rattle, like when you crank a subwoofer. A breeze was blowing at me through the crack of the door and below it. It was warm, humid, and thick with that horrible smell. Scratching my head, I deduced it was the guy praying who maybe farted. It was a funny thought, and I actually laughed out loud at the prospect, but then I noticed my voice was now repeating itself in an echo. It sounded like I was in a vast location, not a bathroom. This was no fart, though. The air had become extremely humid, and the heat was already making me sweat. At this point, I had already considered this one of the stranger bathroom experiences, but what happened next was downright ridiculous, and by ridiculous I mean soul-shatteringly horrifying. The horror behind me was real, tangible, and relentless. Every step felt like a lifetime as I sprinted through the muck and slime, my shoes slipping and sliding on the treacherous ground. The restroom door loomed ahead, a beacon of normalcy amidst the nightmare. The fat guy, still covered in soap, was shouting something at me, but his words were lost in the roar of the monster and the echoing screams of the faces. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't afford to. Every ounce of my being was focused on reaching that door, crossing the threshold back into reality. As I reached the door, I grabbed the handle and yanked it open with all my might. The fluorescent lights of the restroom blinded me for a moment, and I stumbled inside, slamming the door shut behind me. The cacophony of the otherworldly cavern was abruptly cut off, replaced by the familiar sounds of flushing toilets and the hum of the ventilation system. I collapsed against the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The fat guy was still there, staring at me with wide eyes. "You made it," he said, his voice a mixture of awe and relief. I nodded, too exhausted to speak. My mind was reeling from the sheer impossibility of what I had just experienced. The mundane reality of the restroom was a stark contrast to the nightmarish landscape I had escaped from. "Are you okay?" the fat guy asked, offering me a hand to help me up. I took his hand and stood up, my legs shaky and weak. I think so, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. What the hell was that? He shook his head. I don't know, man. I've been stuck here trying to avoid it. You're the first person I've seen come back. I glanced around the restroom, my eyes scanning for any signs of the portal or the monster. But everything seemed normal. Just a regular, albeit filthy, rest stop bathroom. We need to get out of here, I said, urgency creeping into my voice. Now. He nodded in agreement. Yeah, let's go. We hurried out of the restroom and into the main area of the rest stop. The smell of fast food and the chatter of travelers was a bizarre comfort. It felt almost surreal, like stepping out of a nightmare and back into the real world. We didn't stop until we were outside, standing in the parking lot under the bright lights. I turned to the fat guy. Do you have a car? He shook his head. No, I've been stuck here for days. I nodded, pulling my car keys from my pocket. Come with me, we'll get the hell out of here together. He didn't hesitate. We got into my car and I started the engine, my hands still trembling. As we pulled out of the rest stop, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the monster chasing after us. But there was nothing, just the ordinary rest stop fading into the distance. The drive back to Boston was a blur. We didn't speak much, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I dropped the fat guy off at a nearby shelter and made my way home, my mind still grappling with the horrifying experience. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the cavern, the monster, and the poor girl who had been dragged away. The normalcy of my apartment felt fragile, like it could shatter at any moment and plunge me back into that nightmare. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of the rest stop bathroom began to fade, though it never truly left me. I avoided rest stops as much as possible, and when I did have to use one, I made sure to be quick, always glancing over my shoulder. I never spoke of the incident to anyone, not even my girlfriend. It was a dark secret I carried with me, a reminder that there are things in this world, things in the spaces between, that we are not meant to understand. And every time I pass a rest stop on I-90 East, I can't help but shiver, wondering if the portal is still there, waiting for its next victim.